It's my pleasure today to introduce the keynote speaker, Chris Gambian. Chris is the CEO of the Nature Conservation Council, and the Nature Conservation Council has been at the forefront of some of our state's most important conservation battles over the last 65 years more. Interestingly, there's really great alignment between Nature Conservation Council and the Uniting Church. They talk a lot about believing in the power of taking action like we do, and they also want, not surprisingly, New South Wales to become ecologically sustainable like we do. Chris has been the chief executive for a few years now, and he's really taken an organisation with a really rich history and sharpened its advocacy focus and its mobilisation focus. So it's my pleasure to hand over today to Chris.
Thanks, Emma. My daughter, Millie, has joined me here this morning. She has been doing speeches at school, and I'm hoping that she's going to give me a few pointers. Millie is the elder of our two daughters. She was born in October 2013, about 3 weeks after Tony Abbott was elected. I'll come back to Tony Abbott in a moment. In the first few weeks of Millie's life, I think I was less a father and more a Secret Service agent for this new little baby of ours. I had a heightened awareness of every possible risk my baby might encounter. I would stand guard as she slept, lest a poorly executed gurgle or a move of an arm put her in harm's way. That first drive home, some of you know exactly what I mean, happened in slow motion. And if a police escort or wrapping the car in bubble wrap was a possibility, then I'd probably happily have taken it. Of course, I'm no different in that respect to any new parent. We all do things that all the things we can possibly imagine, and there is a steady stream of products that come onto the market with each passing year to help to keep our kids safe. Bed rails, stair gates, car seats with extra special ratings, safety ratings, bike helmets, knee pads, zucchini spiralizers. There is a massive industry built around our desire to give our kids the best start in life and the kids that keep our kids safe. In the summer of 2019, as bushfires were hotter, more devastating and more expansive than any other bushfires human history has ever recorded, a thick blanket of smoke enveloped our city and our state. Fine ash covered our cars, our furniture, and our clothes. School end-of-year concerts and presentation days were moved indoors. I would do absolutely anything to keep Millie and her little sister Edie safe. You would do the same for the kids in your life. But in the summer of 2019, here in Sydney and up and down the eastern seaboard, we couldn't keep our kids safe from the air. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm absolutely honoured to have the opportunity to speak with you for a few minutes this morning, and I commend you for this absolutely marvellous event. I'm grateful for the country on which we meet, the land of the Barramatagal people of the Darug Nation. I pay my respects to ancestors and elders. Millie and I have travelled from Bidjigal country this morning, and I also of the Darug Nation, and I pay my respects to ancestors and elders of that country. I also acknowledge any Aboriginal people who are with us today. The Brazilian Catholic Archbishop Helder Camero once famously quipped, "When I feed the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why so many are poor, they call me a communist." This morning, I want to make the case for the systemic change that will be critical if we are to meet the existential challenge we have been set, to limit global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. At the Nature Conservation Council, we, along with many others in the climate movement, have been campaigning for a transition to 100% clean energy by 2030. The logic is simple enough. 47.7% of carbon emissions in New South Wales comes from energy generation. If we can reduce our dependence on fossil fuels for energy production, we can make massive inroads into our carbon footprint. But you all know that. Over the last few decades, climate action has come to mean clean energy almost interchangeably. And indeed, the reaction against climate action tends to be a reaction against the transition to clean energy. The clean energy transition is tangible, practical action every Australian can participate in. Early schemes to have households adopt renewable energy through high feed-in tariffs for solar panels and other financial measures have had an enormous take-up and corresponding success. Might flick that slide for me. We are a nation of plentiful sunshine, and every day the rooftop revolution in the suburbs of New South Wales presses on. But despite that extraordinary action, personal action, and public investment in personal transformation, about 80% of our energy still comes from fossil fuels. Neoliberalism has instilled in us the primacy of the responsibility of us as individuals in a society that is little more than an assemblage of utility maximising consumers. The solution to deforestation in the Amazon is recycling newspapers. Of excessive plastic waste, your shopping bags and straws. Plant a garden, make a compost heap, tend to your worm farm, make smart consumer choices, offset your air miles. Offset your air miles. Do you tick those little boxes when you go to book a flight? So that you can fly guilt-free? I do. Consider this. The sum total of all the carbon emissions of the entire domestic aviation industry is around 9 million tonnes per year. That's a very large carbon footprint. But to put that in some perspective, the Vales Point power station on the New South Wales Central Coast is responsible for around 7 million tonnes of CO2 a year alone. New South Wales has 5 coal-fired power stations. The 2 largest, Bayswater and Eraring, produce around double the CO2 emissions of Vales Point. The best consensus that world leaders have managed to reach is that developed economies such as Australia must aim to be at net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And whilst New South Wales and other states and territories have committed to this goal, our national government has not. The best assessment of scientists is that we need to achieve net zero in the highly industrialised world well before 2050 if we are to avoid the catastrophic effects of warming above 1.5 degrees. This is not the time for incrementalism. We are in a crisis. The personal efforts of people of goodwill is not enough to meet the challenge that we must meet. The Tomago aluminium smelter just outside Newcastle consumes roughly 10% of the energy produced in New South Wales, 10%, thereby making it alone responsible for approximately 4% of the carbon emissions generated in our state each year. It does not matter how energy efficient your dishwasher is if we do not find a solution for producing aluminium at Tomago with clean energy. And there is hope. Late last year, the New South Wales government announced a massive reorganisation of the energy sector that will create the conditions under which the energy transition can now happen. At the Nature Conservation Council, we joined with other climate organisations on a campaign called Repower. The aim was to ensure that the dream of 100% clean energy was not impeded by public policy settings, but rather supported through proper redesign of the energy sector. In addition to our home rooftops, New South Wales has plentiful sunshine in the west of the state, plentiful wind in the southwest and northern tablelands, and the largest energy storage project in Australia, Snowy 2.0 in the high country. New South Wales also has an energy grid highly concentrated on the coal-producing regions of the Hunter Valley and Lithgow. By creating renewable energy zones, investing in new grid infrastructure, and dropping regulatory hurdles, new energy generation can be created over the next few years that will more than replace the existing output of the coal-fired power stations. By promoting storage solutions like large batteries, the government helps shore up the reliability of supply. Yes, it's true, the sun isn't always shining and the wind isn't always blowing, so you charge your batteries when it is, whilst potentially creating thousands of new jobs in manufacturing and infrastructure. Pumped hydro, where excess energy produced by the sun and wind is used to pump water up the hill, then released downwards to spin a turbine to produce energy when it's needed. That can likewise ensure that the complex task of maintaining consistent, reliable supply of electricity is achieved. All of this is only possible through public policy settings, and more often than not, through public investment. And we are already seeing results. Recent reports show that all but one coal-fired power station in New South Wales is losing money. The market is forcing the transition. Clean energy is not just urgently necessary, it is now actually cheaper. AGL has already pressed ahead with the closure of the Liddell power station by 2023. Some estimates have our other New South Wales power stations closing as much as 5 years ahead of their planned closure dates. Now, you may be surprised to know that New South Wales is one of the deforestation hotspots in the world. In fact, so much vegetation is being cleared each year in New South Wales, and so much is anticipated to be cleared, that government assessments of overall emission reduction target between now and 2020 and 2030 need to factor in land clearing as having a counter effect. That is not a problem created by a failure to recycle your newspapers, nor is it a problem associated with printing out your emails or the excessive junk mail in your letterbox. It is a problem created by public policy. In 2018, it became significantly easier to clear forests on private land in New South Wales, and clearing has doubled. This is not to in any way dismiss the personal choices we might make. Change begins at home. It begins in communities, and it begins in the example we set other people. I don't want to minimise the importance of the transformative effect that people of goodwill have in creating new norms, challenging culture, and asserting new values in our society. These are all crucial, and the role of churches as leaders in community thinking and action is central to that. Last night, as I was preparing for today, I found Pope Francis's encyclical on care for our common home. And as a Catholic, although I will admit that a priest once did refer to me as a cultural Catholic, I thought I'd better read it. The Pope implores us to act. Grounded in the gospel and inspired by his namesake, St. Francis, we are each called to act according to our ability, and we are each collectively called to act according to the best judgment of science and in the interests of humankind and the earth. Nothing could be more fundamental to loving God than loving creation. Now, I promised I would talk about Tony Abbott. At the 2013 election, a culture war that was predominantly grounded in the denial of climate science was rewarded. Since that time, facts that have been accepted in the public square are now called into question. The debate about how to best solve the climate crisis has been diminished to a debate about whether Australia has any role at all in the solving of global climate change. The choice in climate policy is now framed as a choice between conceding to the demands of environmentalists or maintaining a strong economy and good paying jobs, as if the very existence of our economy, to say nothing of our food supply or national security, doesn't rest on swift and effective climate action. And so long as that culture war continues to be waged, so long as there is a perceived political reward for intransigence on climate action, so long as climate action is seen as a left-wing indulgence and not an urgent necessity, progress towards net zero will have a handbrake on it. Remember the loss of the Great Australian Weekend that our current Prime Minister warned of at the last election? We still live in a country where a political leader will stall the transition to a clean transport sector if it means able to frame his opponent as un-Australian, anti-masculine, captured by niche interests. Now, some of you may already see yourselves as greenies or basket weavers or left lunatics or whatever the in vogue slur may be. Others of you may not. And indeed, a great many of you most likely see yourselves as politically middle of the road or even conservative. But all of you have extraordinary political power. Now, I don't mean that as some sort of rhetorical device to argue for the resilience of our democracy in troubled times and all of that. I'm not talking about some folksy power citizens have to band together and create change through the power of the Westminster system. I'm not repeating a cliche. I'm talking about you here, assembled now in this place for this purpose. You have extraordinary political power. You confound the expectations of political orthodoxy. There is a calculus in Australian electoral politics around climate change that is rapidly moving, and you have the ability to drive that move. You cannot be readily dismissed as fitting into the boxes of environmentalists that we're usually confined to. Collectively, you are part of the political base of every political party, every politician, and every candidate. You are community leaders in diverse ways, and your voices cannot be silenced or disregarded. I hope and pray that when you decide what climate action means for you, you choose to use that extraordinary voice. Thank you again so much for having me, and my very best wishes for your conference.